Hello, and welcome to our podcast for college Catholics, where we discuss faith and spirituality from a Catholic perspective. I am your host, Father Patrick Wainwright. Last episode, we spoke about how learning about your faith, and especially the purpose of life, can change the direction of your life for the better. Today, we will bring in a guest and good friend of mine, and we will speak about the life of Blessed Carlo Acutis to see how faith definitely changed his life and made a great impact not only in his life and his family, but in the whole church. Thank you for joining me today in this new episode of our podcast for college Catholics. Please remember to check out our website at forcollegecatholics.org if you want to find out more about the show, or if you want to check out previous episodes. Today I want to bring in a guest, college student Colton Duncan, to speak about the life of a recently beatified saint, Carlo Acutis. So hello, Colton, great to have you here, and how are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
It's great to have you today in the studio, and why don't you tell us a little bit about you?
Okay, sounds good. So I'm currently a sophomore at Hillsdale College. I'm studying international business with a language focus in German. I also am a resident assistant at a dorm, the head resident assistant. And what's really neat about Hillsdale is like the dorm culture is very, very strong. So like each dorm has its own community, and it's just a lot of fun to invest in that.
And you're in charge of 60 students, right? So you have to organize what things you need to make sure they are disciplined, and you also have to kind of mentor them in some way.
Yeah, so there's a lot of mentorship involved. Some of it's just simply dorm maintenance, making sure that people get along.
Very
and,
good.
There's that 5% of the time when you're dealing with,
problems,
heavier situations, you could say.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, now, why don't you tell me a little bit about other fun things about your life? For example, is there anything in your college life that was important for your faith? Or if there's any other fun fact, like any hobbies that you like doing apart from studying and reading?
Right. Apart from studying and reading. Wow. So recently I've been getting a lot more into writing. So I write a bit of poetry, and I've been writing some articles for some student publications and other
Awesome.
small publications. That's a lot of fun. In terms of faith, really just having the time in college to, a lot of college students find it's a struggle to structure their lives a little bit because they have just total freedom. I found that to be a challenge, yes, but also a big blessing because I now have the opportunity to go to daily mass, have a consistent prayer life and that sort of thing. So that's been a real blessing for me.
Very good. Well, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing a little bit about your life. And today I wanted to bring up the topic of Carlo Acutis. It's a blessed that has been beatified some years ago, and I'd like you to give us your input about his life. I think it's important in his life that, first of all, he's a very recent saint, and he was beatified in a short period of time. To beatify a saint, to beatify any person, any human being, right, there has to be even some miracles, and one of them has to be approved by the church as a real intervention of God through the saint. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Carlo Acutis?
Okay, yeah, as you mentioned, he's a recent saint. So he was born in 1991. Which I relate to quite a bit because I was born just 2 years later. So like he's a contemporary almost.
He's a kid.
Yeah, exactly. He's just a kid. And he was a kid when he passed. He died in 2006 at the age of 15.
15 years old.
Yeah, and his his beatification was back in October in 2020.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and so the fact that 14 years after his death, he was beatified, really speaks a lot to his own sanctity on the one hand, and on the other hand, the desire of the church to, give all of the young Catholics in the world a good example of what it means to be holy in our context, in our times.
Absolutely, because it's good to know that there are young men living in this world, and like Carlo Acutis, that apparently he was into technology and web design and so forth, and that he was a saint. So we can be saints, young men who like computers can be saints. And there's a little, we can talk a bit more about his entire life, but just one thing about this is that he liked to play video games. And one of his resolutions in one of his retreats was to play only 1 hour a week of video games. And this man is a saint, right? This young man is a saint. So why don't you tell me from the beginning, where he was born, about his upbringing, and how it is that he became a saint?
Okay, so Carlo was Italian, but something you should know is that he was actually born in London. So his parents worked. Yeah, his parents worked in Germany and England for a while. So he was born and baptized in London. And shortly after his birth, 4 months or so, his parents moved back to Milan, where he was raised.
Okay.
And really from a very early age, Carlo showed like a particular religiosity. When he was 4 years old, and his mom's father, his grandfather, passed away, he apparently had a dream where his grandfather came to him and asked for his prayers.
Wow.
And
that's pretty awesome.
So Carlo showed a very strong prayer life, even from a very young age.
And I understand that his parents were not that devout, right? They were Catholic.
No, they weren't. Yeah, during this time, they no longer attended weekly mass even.
Oh, no way.
And so when Carlo began having this interest and began asking a lot of questions, he would actually have to end up going to his family's Polish babysitter.
Wow.
Yeah. And so the babysitter would be the one who would answer all of like the questions about God and the faith.
Good for her.
Right. Yeah. A great example of apostolate there and of ministry. Like,
absolutely.
Even in a small role like that, like imagine what Carlo would have been if he didn't have that babysitter there who was interested in having him grow in his relationship with God. Yeah. He also had a really big devotion to the Eucharist from very early on. So at the age of 7, he started talking to his parents about receiving First Communion. So that was, that's a lot earlier than kids normally receive First Communion. So his parents went and got permission for him to be able to receive communion from an earlier age. And, even as a young boy, as his father said, and especially after his First Communion, he never missed daily mass. And he never, there was never a day in which he didn't pray a rosary.
Wow. So that's a question I had, because sometimes we say he was very devout. He had a great devotion to the Eucharist. What was that devotion about in his life, so that those who are listening, right, could try to imitate? Because that's the idea. We have a saint. He's in heaven now because he's a blessed. He had devotion to the Eucharist. And what was that like? What did he do to have that devotion so that we can imitate him?
Right. Well, one of the things that he did was he would always show up early before Mass or stay a little bit after Mass to do a holy hour if he could, or just to spend some time before the Blessed Sacrament if he couldn't.
So he would go before Mass and do a preparation before Mass. And
that's right.
Reflect on what the Mass was about and put his intentions for the Mass. And then after the Mass, he would give thanks to God for maybe 5-10 minutes, something like that. That's what he was doing.
Yeah, or longer. He has a quote, I can't remember the exact quote off the top of my head, but it's something along the lines of, the more Eucharist we receive, the more Jesus we have in our souls.
Right. Correct. Absolutely. And why don't you tell me a little bit about the Eucharistic miracles study that he did a research, and there was something about, a website or something like that.
Right. So as we mentioned, he had a particular devotion to the Eucharist from a very early age. At around the age of 11, he got this idea, because he was really interested in computers and the internet. He got this idea of putting together a catalog of all of the world's Eucharistic miracles and making a website to basically make that information available worldwide.
That is awesome.
And, we have to think, this is back in the days when internet was still just dial-up. We're talking about like turtle speed internet. So people who were interested in computers in these days, they were real geeks. And Carlo had a special skill with computers. So, he basically worked on this project up to the point of his death. So from the age of 11 to the age of 15, he was very invested. Right.
And that is important because most people don't know what a Eucharistic miracle is.
Right.
And what are the Eucharistic miracles that we could see today. So just as a brief background to those who are listening, a Eucharistic miracle is some miraculous event related to the Holy Eucharist in which, for some reason, the normal laws of nature do not apply to the Holy Eucharist, right? So, for example, a very famous one, the Eucharistic miracle of Lanciano, the most powerful one that I know of, is that the priest in the 9th century was celebrating Mass on his way from Rome to Germany. He had done a pilgrimage to Rome. He was on his way back to Germany, and he had asked God to strengthen his faith in the Eucharist because he was doubting a little bit. So when he stopped at this small parish church, he celebrated Mass. And when he was celebrating Mass, the bread, which we know changes into the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ during the Mass at the transubstantiation or the consecration, and the wine that we know changes into the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ, actually changed into flesh. The bread changed into flesh, and the wine changed into blood. So that is a Eucharistic miracle because that's not your typical event. That doesn't typically happen. And you can go today and visit Lanciano, Italy, and see in a monstrance the host that is still flesh. It's dried up, but it's still flesh. And you can see the clots of blood that are dried up, but they're the original blood clots that happen after that Eucharistic miracle. So there's many other Eucharistic miracles, maybe not as powerful as that one. And what he tried to do is to gather them together and put them on a website. And is that website available today?
Oh, yeah, you can still visit it. It's www.miracolieucaristici.org. So that's a bit of Italian there.
And we'll put it in the show notes. So anyone who's listening and wants to check it out, you can go to the show notes, and there we'll have the website printed out. So you can probably like a hyperlink, and you can click it and find the original website that he prepared.
Right. And it's interesting. I have a personal story connected with this website. Maybe about 3 or 4 years ago, I came across a book that was basically a printout, a nicely presented printout of this website that had that whole catalog of Eucharistic miracles. And I was in Argentina around Buenos Aires at the time, and actually came across a couple of Eucharistic miracles that were in Buenos Aires.
Wow.
And yeah, I learned all about them, and I was able to use the stories to talk to some of the locals there. So just something, a small project like that can have just such vast consequences.
Absolutely. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the rest of his life, especially the end you wanted to share a little bit about the end of his life.
Right. So Carlo is interesting. He's one of those young saints who die very early on. And he dies of leukemia at the age of 15. And something that's very striking about him is how quickly, things proceeded. So on the 2nd of October, 2006, he falls ill with like some flu-like symptoms, right? Flu-like symptoms. And it doesn't seem to be that bad. But just about a week later, on the 8th of October, things get dramatically worse, bad. And so his parents take him to the hospital where, he's diagnosed with leukemia, and it's already in a very late stage. So, he'll end up dying 4 days after he goes to the hospital. And, there's a total of 10 days between when he first falls ill with light symptoms and October 12th, which is the date on which he actually died. And it's just so interesting because Carlo, throughout the whole process, has this profound and deep peace that really left a deep impression on, his doctors, his friends. He actually said when he was asked about, how he had this peace, he said, "I'm happy to die because I have lived my life without wasting a minute on those things that do not please God." So he's a great example of this idea of memento mori, which is the concept that death can happen at any time. I can come before the throne of God at any time, and I need to be prepared.
So memento mori is a Latin expression.
That's right.
And how would you translate it into English?
Remember death. Remember death.
Very good. And in this case, what I think is what happened with Carlo is that the peace that he had was because he had lived the previous 14, how many years?
15.
15 years. Average, 15. The previous 15 years of his life for God, inspired by faith and trying to serve God in every day of his life. So when life suddenly came to an end, he was not like in desperation or concern, what I'm going to say to God. He was ready to give an account to God of his life because he had lived for God, right? That's what he meant to say, right? With that expression.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, and he was someone who lived for heaven, and there was a moment when like the doctors came to him and said like, "Oh, you must be suffering so much."
Right, because leukemia.
Right, with leukemia, and he responds, "I know that there are people in this world that are suffering much more than I am."
That's amazing.
So he just had an unusual awareness for others, and a deep charity that was experienced by a lot of his fellow students and his own family, which just shone through his life.
Why don't you give us one last thought? How did Carlo Acutis' life affected you in any way, or what is most striking for you of his life?
Well, I'll have to come back to the concrete example of that book I came across. Oftentimes when we work or we try to say words that we think will be helpful to others, or we try to give a good example, so often we feel like those things end up fruitless because we can't see the fruits. But the exact opposite is true. The seeds that you plant will grow in many places that you will never see. And, it's like a kid who sat in his living room and put together some stories and made a small website, would eventually reach out to, if he was able to reach out to me through a book that was published based on his website and lead me to go through some experiences that led me closer to God. I can't even imagine the countless others that have been affected by, just something he probably did on a Saturday morning when he was off school and didn't have a lot of homework. Right.
And I think that a good thing of that is to have hope, right? That the good things we do when we're inspired by faith and we're trying to do the will of God, those things are always going to give some fruit in the hands of God, right? And according to the will of God. So we have to have hope that the good things we do will affect someone in a positive way, right?
That's right. Absolutely.
Very good. Well, thank you very much for joining me today and our listeners. And thank you for sharing this great, for me, very great, inspiring story, right?
Yeah, my pleasure.
One thing that is amazing is that if you look online for Carlo Acutis, you can find pictures of him, and he is in his tomb, right? So he was buried, and then it seems that his body is in pretty good state yet, which is surprising. It's almost an incredible thing. And he's dressed in his typical clothes, and he has a pair of Nikes on and, jeans and so forth. So that's pretty impressive. So I would like to definitely encourage all our listeners to pray to Blessed Carlo, asking for his intercession that we all may also grow daily in our faith, and particularly in our devotion to the Holy Eucharist, right? To have that same spirit of faith and spirit of hope in God, and to share our faith with others, because there's no question that any good witness of your faith will fall in some good, inspired ears, right? And it will touch someone's life. So that's all for today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Colton, for joining me today. And for everyone listening, please make sure to check out our website at forcollegecatholics.org. And remember to subscribe to Apple or Google or Spotify to receive all the future episodes where we will continue to discuss different topics of faith and some other examples and some other interviews that we will have. So thank you so much, and we will see you next time. May God bless your day.